every piece can regrow whatever it's missing. And so when you cut a piece from that worm, you can ask a simple question: how does it know how many heads to make?
Welcome to the What the Biohack podcast, powered by Bronic, to discover what the heck security means for biology. We interview some of the world's mad scientists and rad hackers across deceivingly unrelated disciplines to uncover what the future holds and how we can design against crime. My name is Dr. Miriam El Gabri, your host, and today we're speaking with Professor Michael Levin, Director of the Allen Discovery Center at Tufts University and Tufts Center for Regenerative and Developmental Biology. Welcome, Michael.
Thank you so much. Yeah, happy to be here.
So I was first introduced to your work at Zuzalu, which is, for the listeners that don't know, this pop-up city that was held in Montenegro this year in April, and my mind was completely blown by your talk in one of those days, which was titled Bioelectricity, Biobots, and the Future of Biology. And we're going to talk about each component in that title in just a second. But I want to specifically emphasize one thing, and I think that's where we're going to start, and please delve into it in as much detail as you please. It's this almost paradigm shift within synthetic biology, where you're moving away from what traditionally was thought being the core of synthetic biology of genetic engineering into this field of bioelectricity and its role in controlling growth and form. And it's really fascinating. Could you please talk to us a little bit about this, introduce us to this topic, and how you first became interested in this approach?
Sure. Just so before I get into the details of bioelectricity, there are a couple of ways in which what I am talking about is different from the mainstream approach, and it's not meant to replace it. It's meant to be complementary with it. And one could think of bioelectricity as just another set of mechanisms which we could exploit using synthetic biology, the way we exploit biochemical signaling and biomechanical signaling. And so you could add bioelectrical. And so you could use bioelectricity in exactly the same way that people have done classic synthetic biology. So bottom-up circuit design. But what I'm going to kind of argue is that's great, and that will have all kinds of positive impacts. But there's a bigger picture here, which is that bioelectricity, the reason that we should care about bioelectricity is not that it's just another piece of physics that has to be taken into account and maybe exploited. Bioelectricity has this uniquely interesting position as a kind of cognitive glue that binds together parts of your body, for example, all the cells in your brain, and allows them to have an emergent higher level cognitive structure to it. So with you can think of human minds or simpler animal minds or all kinds of other types of cognitive systems that have goals, preferences, memories that don't belong to any of the individual parts. So you and I are basically bags of neurons and other cells, and yet we have these grandiose plans and hopes and dreams and everything else that our individual neurons don't have. And the thing that enables those cells to give rise to this complex kind of system is in large part bioelectricity. So what that means is that bioelectricity, as the medium that literally holds together the cognitive being that we and other creatures are, is a kind of privileged access layer. It's a privileged interface to things that remember and learn and plan ahead in some cases and have preferences and goals. So that means that by having access to that interface, we can take advantage of native intelligence of cells and tissues. It means that we don't have to bottom up micromanage by engineering every functionality that we wanted to have. We could actually take advantage of some of the intelligence that's already there. And so that's a different perspective, right? It's a complementary approach where instead of building bottom up all of the functionality that we wanted to have, we can do things like train the system or exploit its ability to solve problems or to have memories, and right. And this is, humans are familiar with this. We were training dogs and horses for thousands of years before we knew any neuroscience. So yes, you could go in and micromanage the individual neurons and play the animal like a puppet, but that would be very hard. And instead, what we do is take advantage of this amazing learning interface that it offers us, which is by training and rewards and punishments and those kinds of things, we can get them to do interesting things, even if we don't know or micromanage all the details. So it's this top-down approach that bioelectricity kind of uniquely offers to us, and that's why I think it's an important complement. It's not just another piece of physics. So now we can get into this question. Okay, so what is bioelectricity, right? Cells in the body, and of course free living cells as well in the environment. What they're doing 24/7 is basically hacking each other to get each other and their neighbors to do various things. So cells, all living creatures, take in and push out information to their neighbors, to the outside environment, and they're trying to improve their situation by making other creatures do things. And so in the body, this has been harnessed towards morphogenesis in the body, and then meaning the creation of different organs and the upkeep of these organs against aging and cancer, and the repair in some cases. And in the brain, it's harnessed towards these really remarkable events where behavior is controlled in three-dimensional space. So all of these individual neurons get together and they communicate with each other to allow the body as a whole to move and navigate through three-dimensional space, and to have, do this kind of mental time travel by imagining things into the future and remembering things in the past. So how do they do this? How do they talk to each other? So there are many ways, but bioelectricity is an important one that we focus on, which works like this. Every cell in its surface has little tiny proteins called ion channels. And these ion channels have the ability to let charged particles, so sodium, potassium, chloride, protons, go in and out of the cell membrane. And as they go in and out, because they're charged, they build up a voltage potential between inside and outside. So you can think of little batteries all around the cell surface. And so every cell will acquire some kind of voltage potential, and it can change over time. And what it can do is communicate that voltage potential to its neighbor through electrical or chemical synapses. And that then creates a network where every cell is talking to other cells, sometimes nearby, sometimes quite far away, but they're all talking to each other. And it's the dynamics of those electrical states shifting around the network that literally implements all of the things that are required for our cognition. So the memories, the preferences, the behavioral repertoire, all of that is within that electrophysiology. So bioelectricity is this idea that amazing trick that the hardware, that this ion channel hardware is able to run behavioral software because of these bioelectrical dynamics. That trick is actually ancient. It didn't just show up when brains and neuron and muscles came on the scene. It actually is much older. It was around the time of bacterial biofilms that evolution actually discovered this. And ever since then, these electrical networks have been active throughout the body. So during embryogenesis and in animals that don't even have a brain, bioelectrics is critical to allow a different kind of collective intelligence. So we are a collective intelligence, right? The collective intelligence of our neurons, but the rest of the body has a kind of collective intelligence too. It solves problems in three-dimensional morphospace, meaning how many eyes should you have? Where should your eyes be relative to the rest of your face, and so on. So those kind of problems are solved in part by these electrical networks. So bioelectricity, as we study it, is the study of how is information processed by various body tissues, not just brains, in order to solve problems.
And just to give an example for people that weren't there when you were giving the presentation with those really cool experimental videos, but what's an example of implementing bioelectricity in the context of morphogenesis? So you did some experiments with worms and basically using the memory of the cells to create another head when you cut the worm. So please speak to us about that, just so that the listeners that have no idea what that means practically have a visualization.
Sure, sure. Yeah, there are many examples of bioelectrics having that kind of role, and the worm example is a good one. So Planaria are these amazing flatworms. They have a head and a tail and many different organ systems inside and lots of different cell types. And one of the most amazing aspects is that you can cut them into pieces, and in fact many pieces, and every piece will regenerate exactly to a complete worm. So every piece can regrow whatever it's missing. And so when you cut a piece from that worm, you can ask a simple question: how does it know how many heads to make? And so we tested this idea that what if the memory of what a correct planarian looks like, because after all, this is, any kind of a regenerative and in fact developmental process is basically a kind of homeostatic loop where you have a set point. This is with a correct state. And when you're deviated from that state by injury, by mutations, by teratogens, whatever, cells can keep working towards that goal and then they stop when it's reached. So if you're a planarian, you're cut into pieces, each piece will grow until they make a perfect worm and then they stop. If you're a salamander and you lose your limb, those limb cells will build a perfect new salamander limb and then they stop. So the whole thing is about, it's like an error minimization scheme or a or like the thermostat in your house. It's basically there's a set point and when you deviate away from that set point, they'll keep working until they get there. So we made this hypothesis that the set point in that process is literally an encoded electrical memory. That basically, how do you know how many heads you should have? Well, there should be a memory in there somewhere of how many heads you should have, and that memory could be electrical. And the idea is that much like in the brain, I mean, a lot of what we do is borrow ideas and paradigms and techniques from neuroscience. And so this is very straightforward. If that's the case, then we should be able to find the encoding. We should be able to decode it and to know what it looks like when it says one head versus two. And we should be able to edit the memory and reset the set point. That's the beautiful thing about homeostats like a thermostat. You don't rewire your whole house every time you want to go from 60 degrees to 70 degrees. You just change the set point and the whole system then autonomously keeps, right? So the beautiful thing about that kind of architecture is that you don't have to micromanage all the states. You can just reset the set point. In fact, you don't even have to know everything about how the thing works. You just have to know how to read and write the set point. And so people in neuroscience are trying to do that. There are people doing neural decoding. There are people trying to incept false memories into mice with using optogenetics. I mean, that's been done. So we tried to do the same thing in the Planaria. And so what we showed is that when you cut them into pieces, or even before you cut them into pieces, they do have a voltage a map that you can see, and we visualize it using a voltage-sensitive fluorescent dye. So it's just a molecule that puts out light based on what the local voltage is. And so you can get a map, you can get this voltage map of the whole body, the way that people do in brains. And what you can do is it turns out that you can see a pattern that corresponds to one head, one tail. And so then we can alter that pattern. Now, how do we alter that pattern? We don't use applied fields. There are no electrodes, there are no frequencies, no waves, no magnets, no electromagnetic radiation. The way we manipulate it is exactly the way the cells are meant to be talking to each other, the native interface, which is opening and closing these ion channels. So all these cells on their surface have these ion channels, and they're constantly communicating by opening and closing these channels. So that's what we do. And the way you can do that is exactly how it's done in neuroscience. So you can do it with drugs. You can do it with pharmacological compounds that open and close channels. You can do it with light. In the case of optogenetics, there are various tricks to be able to do that. So what we found is that if we manipulate that electrical gradient, we can rewrite it to say two heads instead of one. And then, and you can do that you can have that kind of abnormal false memory. In a way, to us as an observer, it looks like a false memory, right? And we can incept that false memory into a perfectly normal one-headed body. And then if we cut that animal at that point, then the pieces will build two heads. And so because that literally is the pattern that the cells are using to decide what to build. The collective intelligence, that morphogenetic intelligence has to have a memory of what it's building. That's the memory. And so then you get these two-headed worms, and they're quite amazing. but the kicker is that if you take these two-headed worms and you cut them again into pieces, and this time you don't do anything, plain water, no more drug, no more, and no more manipulations, the pieces continue to form two heads because the memory holds, right? That's the whole point of memory, is that it's stable. Once you rewrite it, it holds the new pattern. And so we can leave them two-headed, we can make them one-headed again, we can sort of shift them back and forth. We can even make them confused and kind of like, those Necker cubes or the face in the vase statue kind of drawing. It's like, it's a perceptual bistability illusion. You look at it and it looks this way or it looks this way. So we can make worms that do that. They have this pattern that they can't decide if should it be one head or two. They're sort of undecided, and so every time you cut it into pieces, and every piece flips a coin and makes an independent decision if it's going to be one-headed or two-headed. So you can manipulate these memories exactly the way you do in the nervous system, and the cells will build to spec.
I mean, this is like, yeah, I still can't get my head around it. I mean, this is despite the developmental stage of the organism, right? Does it depend on the development?
These are adults. These worms are adults. They're not embryos. There's no developmental stage. They're adults.
And does this apply to, have you guys worked on other organisms?
Oh yeah, most of our work is done in frog and in tadpoles and frog embryos. Now we're starting to do things for some of the biomedical applications. We're doing them in human cells and cultures, so organoids and human mesenchymal stem cells and things like that. So it works. People I really need to point out, I'm not the first guy to talk about bioelectricity. I mean, people knew that bioelectricity was important since the early 1900s and probably before that. It's what we did is develop the first molecular tools that allowed us to read and write this bioelectrical information. And there are a number of other excellent labs around that work in this space. And what we, what our
the voltage maps they were saying, so mapping those voltage maps to is it the identification phase basically on which bioelectrical signals to use?
So there's a couple of components that are critical, right? So seeing the maps is one thing, but characterizing the maps isn't enough, because then you still don't know, does it mean anything? Could it be an epiphenomenon? Characterizing them is not sufficient. So the next thing you want to develop, which we developed also around the year 2000, are tools to rewrite the pattern. So that's what you really want, is functional tools. So there's the pattern, but it's either broken or it's damaged or it's going to lead to cancer or a birth defect or something. How do I rewrite it? And to prove that if you rewrite it, the cells in fact obey and build things, right? So we did that. And then the third thing that is really critical is to have a computational method of some sort to decode the pattern, because you see these patterns, sometimes they're very obvious. So the worm pattern is kind of clear. There's a pattern that we call the electric face, which basically tells a frog embryo where the eyes go, where the mouth goes. That one is really obvious because it looks like a face. I mean, you just look at it and you go, oh, that's going to be the face. You can tell. But there are many other patterns that are very non-obvious. They're just very complex. You don't know what the pattern is, and in order to make changes, if you wanted to change the pattern, that's really not obvious. Like what should the pattern be if I wanted more fingers, if I wanted to grow a particular organ, what should the pattern be? So this idea of having a computational tool that helps you design these patterns and helps you decode them, along with a theory of what they mean, which for me pulls everything from neuroscience. So I think these are literal memories. I think it's a collective intelligence. I mean, these are ideas that I don't think have been said before in the bioelectric literature, even though people have known that bioelectrics are important for all these things for many years. But this firm connection with neuroscience and cognition, I think, is new. And those are the three things. Once you have those three things, and we're only beginning, this is just the beginning. We're just scratching the surface yet of what can be done here. Those are the three ingredients towards a mature science of bioelectrics.
And you mentioned the computational tools. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you do that translation?
Yeah. And again, these are just beginning. So a lot of this is going to get, I hope, with us and with other people working on this, are going to be kind of really transformational in the future. But right now, what we have are models, and so the best one was made by my collaborator Alexis Pytek, and so she made this amazing bioelectric simulator that allows us to actually to model how the bioelectrics works and what the patterns are going to be given certain channels that are expressed in the tissue. And so that allows us to make a model of a developing brain or a developing planarian, and then ask questions of the model, like, would you be stable if I did this or that? Would the change stick, or would it go back to normal? Or why is there this defect? Or if I wanted to make a change, what would happen? And so one of the things we're doing right now is using AI on top of these bioelectric simulators to be able to ask questions and to be able to say, okay, but the pattern is wrong here. If I wanted to change it, what would it look like, right? So this is all, those kind of tools are all the future of this field.
And has AI helped in identifying, in better simulating what the bioelectrical signals will do?
We have one paper on this so far. The latest stuff is not published and peer reviewed yet, so I'm not going to talk about it. But the one paper we have looks at AI at a kind of a search through the space of possible patterns, and looking at the various patterns that could be made by bioelectric circuits. So that's actually very useful for synthetic biologists, because it shows you what the kinds of bioelectric patterns you could easily make. The best example of all of this was actually from a few years ago, and that was done by a natural intelligence, which is Alexis and Vaibhav Pai, who's a staff scientist in my group. And what they did, they weren't using AI, but they were using these models, and what these computational tools, and what they came up with was a very simple perturbation induced by a human-approved anti-epileptic drug. So it was able to actually pick a drug that already exists and people already take, to reverse a very serious kind of brain damage. This was all done in the frog model, but it was completely amazing to me that you could go from observing the bioelectric pattern that goes wrong in these tadpoles exposed to nicotine and alcohol and things like that, and even mutations. I mean, it even reversed the effects of a really, really powerful notch mutation. The system told us how to reverse all that, and it worked. We tried it and it worked. They got their IQs back, they got their brain structure back. It was unbelievable. And then later we found out that same method. Most recently, we found out that same method also fixes heart and gut defects. So yeah, so that's kind of the best example.
Michael, this is amazing. How does it translate? I mean, this is, the billion-dollar question for anyone in science, but how does this work then translate to humans, right? You alluded to a few applications of this work: regenerative medicine, even cancer reversal. Talk us through how you envision this work to translate to humans, and then perhaps also surpass the treatment, let's say, application into further, I don't know, human augmentation applications as well.
Yeah. So, okay. So the first thing to realize is that all of the major algorithms and the machinery that's needed to make human bodies is widely shared with things that are very simple, like Planaria and beyond. And so this idea that we are so complex, and thus things we learn from these model systems somehow don't translate into medicine is wrong. We're all built of the same basic principles. And so the idea is that once we crack what I call the morphogenetic code, once we understand how collections of cells decide what to build, and to be clear, we're just at the beginning of this. So this is not yet in human medicine. But once we understand how to do this, all of these same strategies are going to be immediately applicable to human birth defects, injuries. So for regenerative medicine, for cancer, for aging, all of this stuff will follow fairly naturally. So I should do a disclosure here, because with David Kaplan, I'm a co-founder of a company called Morphoceuticals, Inc. And the goal of Morphoceuticals is precisely all of the things we were talking about. It's to develop computational.
You're one step ahead.
Is to develop all this stuff to apply it to human medicine. So we are not in clinical trials yet, but I see a fairly direct path from figuring out how to control morphogenesis in simpler, quote unquote, simpler models to applications in humans. And to sort of go beyond, what you're talking about beyond, let's just ask this question: what's the end game for this field? Like, how do we know when we're done and we can all go home, right? And so to me, the way I envision the best case scenario for success sometime in the future is something I like to call the anatomical compiler. So the idea is someday you'll be able to sit down in front of a computer and you'll be able to draw the plant or animal that you want. And it might be something that already exists, or it might be something completely different that's never existed before. It could be an 8-legged frog with a propeller-looking thing on top of its head. You could draw, it could be anything you want. And if we really knew what we were doing, if we crack this morphogenetic code, what that compiler would output would be a set of stimuli that you would have to give to cells to build exactly that thing. And so if we had this, now we're nowhere near that yet, but if we had that, not only could you build new organs for transplantation, you could build anything that humans needed in vivo if something was damaged or removed or whatever. But as you said, you could go beyond what's standard, where evolution happens to have left us at this moment in time, and you could not only build new synthetic living machines, synthetic bioengineering of all types, bots or biobots and things like that, but you could also make changes in the human body. And so if somebody wanted, people contact me all the time and they want, an eye on the back of their heads or something, or, you could have, if we really knew what we were doing, I mean, this is going to sound kind of weird and radical and all that, but I think if we really knew how to communicate our anatomical goals to cells, we would have what I might call freedom of embodiment. You could have whatever body you wanted, right? Because right now, you get what you get. And so you're born and you have various limitations, even in a perfectly healthy human body, which is not all that many people all in all. But if even under those conditions, you still have lots of limitations. You're susceptible to all kinds of weird diseases and aging, and we have certain mental limitations because of the structures of our nervous system. All of that is up for change, and all of that is going to be tractable. And I think it's really important to be, I think you asked the right question. I think it's important to go beyond this idea of treating disease and to get us back to some sort of baseline. That baseline is not optimal. It's not magical. It's just where evolution left us, and we can do way better than that, I think.
I'm super fascinated by the sea and all the creatures that it has in it. So does that mean I can, at some point, once we crack the morphogenical code, I can have skin like cuttlefish, or that camouflages, or is that what it means, that we can essentially, or you mentioned the anatomical compiler? Does that mean we can create real life, Pokemon-like creatures that we can take care and nurture? Is that like the next generation of pets that we have? Draw that future for us a little bit.
Yeah, I think that look, everything you just said. If we came across a planet where all of that existed, so there were Pokemon creatures running around and humans that could live underwater and whatever, we would not be surprised at all. We would say that, yes, we know evolution can find the signals that tell cells to build these things. It's in this option space of morphologies, and then evolution finds them. If evolution can find them, so can engineers. Evolution is not doesn't have a monopoly on making these things. It's a very particular kind of a process with many inefficiencies, but of course done on a massive scale. It has huge power. But engineers can hijack all of that. And I have very little doubt that at some point in the future, I can't give you a timeline. I don't know that I'll see it. I don't know if you'll see it. Probably. I have a feeling you will. But I can't promise that. But all of that is possible. We know it's possible because we see the incredible variety of the living world. And by the way, really important, we start to see now with there have been many examples that go beyond mere developmental plasticity, but things like Xenobots and other plant galls and other types of hacking examples, where you can make things out of perfectly normal genetically wild type cells that are completely different than their default by prompting them with new stimuli. And so the space, that's one of the things I think is really important about these synthetic biology, synthetic morphology tools like Biobots and so on, is that they're basically exploration vehicles for looking around that option space of form and behavior to see what's possible. And I think that space is enormous, and pretty much anything we can come up with, we're going to be able to build. I believe that.
Tell us what a frogolotl is.
Frogolotl. A frogolotl is well, the physical frogolotl is a combination of an early frog embryo and an early axolotl embryo. So basically, it's a chimera of two different species. Conceptually, the reason that frogolotls are interesting is not because anybody needs a cross between a frog and the salamander, but because they point out something very important to us, which I think is one thing that kind of gets us to this issue of security and everything else, which is, despite all the progress in molecular genetics and cell biology and things like that, we still have a really difficult time understanding the software of life. We're pretty good at the hardware, so we can understand proteins and how proteins relate to genomes and all kinds of things about cell function, but we're really not very good at understanding how collectives make decisions. So a collective of cells, how does it make morphological decisions? Specifically, how does it navigate that anatomical morphospace, that space of possibilities? And the frogolotl tells us, gives us an example of that. So baby axolotls don't have baby axolotls have 4 legs. Yeah, so they have little legs. The similar version of a frog, which is a tadpole, at that stage does not have legs. And so now I will say we have the frog genome. It's been sequenced. We have the axolotl genome. It's been sequenced. We make a frogolotl, and I'll ask a simple question. You've got the genome. Can you tell me if a frogolotl is going to have legs or not? And you can't. And so that tells you right away that what genomic information is and isn't good for. So we do not know how to use that kind of information to predict what anatomical structures are going to be built by these cells. And another way to think about it, you can take 2 species of Planaria with different shaped heads, and you can take the neoblasts, which are these stem cells that produce all the new structures in worms, and you can transfer some of them from one head shape into another, and then you can cut the head off, and you can ask, what head shape are they going to build? If half the cells think they should be building one kind of head and the other half think they should be building another kind of head, what are they going to build? We don't have, despite all the molecular genetics and all the stem cell biology and all of that, we have no idea. There are no models that make a prediction on that experiment. So what all these kind of chimeric systems are telling us is that we really need to get better at understanding what collectives are going to do. What are their capabilities? What are their goals? What are they going to do?
I mean, for me, this is all really fascinating, and I think the more you are in science, you tend to have kind of an open mind in experimentation. But for some, and you probably get this question a lot, but did this cause any like ethical dilemma in terms of the experiments that you do? And if not in this one, what's the most significant ethical dilemma that you've encountered during your work, and how have you navigated that?
Yeah, so this is very important. I and I think most scientists think about this stuff all the time, and I'm going to answer it a little differently, I think, than you might expect. To me, so people ask me what keeps me up at night about all of this in terms of ethical problems, and so I like that question. So what keeps me up at night is the possibility that we are not going to be able to rise to the possibilities in front of us and solve all the problems that we're facing. So the lack of progress is the potential lack of progress if we don't do our jobs as well as we could. That's the biggest ethical lapse I worry about. I worry about the moral imperative to do this work, and here's why I say that. Often people who ask about these kind of ethical risks have the following model in mind. They don't say it explicitly, but this is what a lot of people are thinking. Everything's great, and what we need to do is make sure that the scientists don't screw things up. and we know that scientists can screw things up, right? There are potential issues, not so much with this work. There's really not much, but things like transgenic bacteria and viruses and those kinds of things can be a real problem. So that's where a lot of people are coming from. But the fact is, we are not doing fine. The pressing needs out there, first of all, biomedical needs or biomedical suffering. So I'm not even a clinician, and I get phone calls and emails every day now. My kid's got a birth defect. I have a spinal cord injury. I lost a limb. I have degenerative disease. I've got cancer. What's taking you so long? Like, where are the solutions to these problems? I'm having a terrible embodiment here. And so I get these all day long. And so, and that doesn't begin to cover the plight of food animals, all the environmental stuff. I don't need to go through the whole list, but I think it's really critical to understand that the standard human with their standard body and their standard lifespan and their standard susceptibility to disease and their reliance on the trophic food web of other animals that they need to eat, and all of these kinds of things are not some magical optimal baseline that we need to stick with and that we can stick with, and let's just not make things worse. I think that's a terrible perspective. I think the right way to think about this is that we happen to be here in this particular point in evolution that leaves us with all of these suboptimal parameters, and it is now on us to improve life for everybody. And I'm talking about potentially, and I'm of course not the only or the first person to say this kind of stuff, but to improve the lived experience for all sentient beings. We now are starting to get to the point where we have that capability. And so to me, the absolute moral imperative is to do the work that's going to lift people out of these people and animals, to lift them out of these really pretty random vagaries of genetics and environment. You know, the way the way that beings appear in this world, they don't have a choice about what kind of body they end up in. You know, you end up with, you're born, and then you have certain limitations, and maybe you can achieve your full potential that way, and maybe you can't. And to me, this is unacceptable. We now have the ability to improve all that. So that's, certain other kinds of technologies bring additional risks. So if you're making bacteria that are transgenic that might reproduce in the wild, and some kind of things like that, there are extra risks associated with it. But our work doesn't do any of that. And so the biggest ethical risk to think about is the failure to act. Really, is the failure to address the needs of suffering. I mean, that's it. I don't know how much simpler to say it.
What's the first, say we cracked the anatomical compiler and morphogenesis, what's your optimum embodied self? I mentioned the scales and the Pokemon pets. I'm just curious to hear what yours is.
Interesting question. Nobody's asked me that before, and frankly, I haven't had. No, nobody's asked me that. I don't spend a ton of time thinking about it for myself, really. I'd like to keep my my brain going as long as I can. The whole aging thing is a total drag, and I think that I can imagine some other embodiments where I could do more stuff than I can do now. But I'm not really. I don't spend a lot of time focused on that. I would just for me, I just want to keep going with these things as long as I can. But I think it's important. People really worry about well, what if we live longer? Isn't that in some way unnatural? And I said, well, who said that our current 80 years is optimum for anything? If you came across a planet where everybody lived 20 years or everybody lived 200, you'd say, well, okay, fine, that's what it is. And the same thing for IQ, right? If we all had a roughly an IQ of 60, then nobody would think it was bad to sort of move it up. Well, who said an average of 100 is where we should be? I think all of that stuff is up for grabs. So I'd be happier with a higher IQ. I'd be happier with less susceptibility to disease and aging and degeneration. Not really dreaming of tentacles or wings or anything like that, but Why not? Why not?
You did mention, actually, you mentioned dreams earlier. Correct me if I'm wrong. So are there applications there? And then naturally, I always end up talking about synesthesia. I don't know why. I think it's because my mom has it and I always wanted it. And it skipped a generation, obviously, because I don't think I have it. But are there applications there as well with your work? Or
I don't know. I don't think I have anything profound to say about that. I don't study dreams. I know some people who do. I really don't. Yeah, I'm not sure. I don't have a unique theory on dreams. As far as synesthesia goes, I think just in general, I think it's really important to keep in mind that our current sensory world, the kinds of things that we can sense and how we process them, is again a total vagary of the evolutionary process. It is not standard in any way. The fact that we see a very narrow part of the electromagnetic spectrum and that we can process certain number of bits per unit time, and all of that is just where evolution happens to have meandered to in its search. And so you could easily imagine creatures that have wildly different sensory modalities. And in fact we will be those creatures. So you will be able to have an implant that directly lets you feel the solar weather or the stock market, or and this is sensory substitution, right? People have been doing this since the 60s, where you can have senses that look into other spaces. So instead of the three-dimensional space, you could have a sense of for example, the stock market or various other social indices. Like you could literally feel them. And so all of this, we just need to wrap our heads around the fact that this is not some unique, what we have and how we perceive the different senses that we have is not some special way it has to be. It's just one out of an uncountable variety of ways that you could experience the world.
Yeah, I know. I've seen like biohackers having like magnets as implants to kind of sense their microwaves. But so you see more kind of sensory expansion or through implants. What's another example that you see that we haven't seen so far?
Well, I'll give you a simple example. I mean, we are really terrible at envisioning other ways of being. And so for example, we're very good at noticing intelligence in medium-sized objects moving at medium speeds in three-dimensional space. So we see other primates, and we see dogs, and we see birds, and maybe an octopus, and we can recognize that as being intelligent. But imagine, like, all of the cells and tissues of your body are constantly navigating physiological space. It's a high-dimensional space of lots of physiological parameters, and they have to navigate that exactly the same way that a rat navigates a maze, or you and I navigate through our life. And if we were born with an internal sense of our blood chemistry, for example, where you could feel, just imagine a sense of taste that aims inwards, where you could actually sense all of the different things that were going on in your blood, we would have no problem realizing that we live in this high dimensional space, and that the liver and kidneys are intelligent beings that inhabit that space and that do all kinds of interesting problem solving during the day when things happen, and they navigate that space. We would understand that in a primary way, the same way that it doesn't take a lot of mental effort to understand why a dog goes from here to there and does various things. We would see that in anatomical physiological space. And there are other spaces, right? There are so many other spaces. There are transcriptional spaces of gene expression that cells are able to navigate, and there are anatomical spaces that we navigate during. I mean, those journeys are very slow for us, but during metamorphosis, during puberty, and for some animals during metamorphosis, and so on. There are all these other spaces, we don't see them. So you could imagine sensors that look into all those other spaces. Now, some of them you don't want conscious control over because that's a lot of processing. But some of them you might want, and other kinds of spaces exist. All these virtual spaces. Never mind the actual virtual reality stuff that so people can just sort of concoct these things digitally as much as they want. But you could have primary sense of, if you wanted it, I don't know, but you could have a primary sense of how all your friends around the world are feeling today, or how what the happiness index is of your country on a given day. You could have that as a primary sense. You could have that calculated, and have some kind of a perception. And it could be anything. It could be financial markets. It could be the state of various things in the solar system. It could be. I mean, you can imagine it. We could attach it. So someday, it all depends on what do you want to pay attention to. Right now, you're limited. You're limited. If you said, boy, I really would like to pay attention to the X-ray spectrum, and and how a certain sector of the economy is doing. You don't have a primary interface for that. Why not? You could.
No, I really like the biosensory. What would we call it? It wouldn't be virtual reality, bioreality, where you could literally sense your physiological space. Is that and you can, we say, especially when athletes, for example, or people that are active, listen to your body. There's like a whole new meaning to that expression now, because you're essentially saying that your work can lead to the literal listening to your body.
It's not just I just want to be clear. It's not just me. There are tons of people working on this stuff. So I actually like the word virtual reality, not because I think we should be limited to video games and things like that, but it is virtual in an important way. This reality that you see, that's also virtual reality. All of these spaces are arbitrary. It's people ask me sometimes, what if we live in some virtual reality and this isn't even real? I mean, what's the alternative? Like, guaranteed, there's no alternative to that. It's guaranteed that we live in a virtual, self-constructed reality, because we live inside a brain and a body which is connected to the outside world through a limited set of sensors, and we do not come with a pre-built schema for how to understand all this. We construct and we coarse grain reality in particular ways, and there are an uncountable number of ways to do that, given different architectures of a cognitive system, of sensors, whatever. So it really is virtual. All of it is virtual. All of these worlds, whether constructed through in a computer, whether it's some kind of physiological space, whether it's some kind of economic space or social space, all of these things are virtual. They're all constructed.
Is the embodied self that you mentioned earlier the same as embodied mind?
Yeah, this terminology, all of these terms are. I'm less into trying to define them sharply and more about what do they help you do and how do they help you think about these things. I think we could talk about the definition of a self, but I think it's not exactly the same thing as a mind, but they're certainly closely related.
On your website, and I have this quote written because I really wanted to read it out loud. You say to develop generative conceptual frameworks that help us detect, understand, predict, and communicate with truly diverse intelligences, including cells, tissues, organs, synthetic living constructs, robots, and software-based AIs. And I think I'd love to hear more on this. I love the inclusion of all these, as you say, intelligences. So it's both, let's call it wetware, but also hardware and software. And I truly believe that we're going towards kind of a mesh of all these technologies with the living space as well. I'd love to hear your thoughts on how you envision this, and perhaps we can delve into a little bit, because you mentioned the security space. I mean, what are the implications there?
Yeah. Look, I think that for well over 100 years, science fiction has known that science fiction authors have known that the kinds of categories that people like to use, so machine versus organism, evolved versus designed, meaning engineered, living versus non-living, all of these categories are really completely arbitrary, and they only seem sharp and reasonable because of our failures of technology and imagination up until now. None of these categories are actually crisp and binary like that. And we've known for the longest time, in which science fiction authors have explored, this idea that just imagine something lands on your front lawn, and you walk out to it, and the little door opens, and something sort of trundles out, and it's kind of shiny and metallic, and it sort of hands you this poem that it wrote along the way about how happy it is to meet you and the profundity of being a sentient being together in this world and all that. And so now you say, okay, so what do I make of this? Is this a machine? Does that, and if so, what does that mean? Well, the only reason you want to know that is whether you're allowed to take it apart and see what makes it tick and turn it into a toaster, right? That's, or whatever. Like that's what that's what you're really talking about. And or is it a being? And do I need to be nice to it? What is my relationship to this thing going to be? And the reason that we immediately go to aliens is simply to cement right away this idea that all of the familiar touchstones, which is, where does it come from on the tree of life of Earth, right? Is it like a fish? Is it like a mammal? Is it, that's how we normally make these decisions, right? We sort of look at something and we estimate where it is on the tree of life relative to us. And we're not even good at that ethically, at being nice to things that are like us. We're not even good at that. But that's kind of roughly what we try to do. And so that doesn't work. And then you ask yourself, okay, well, maybe we look at what it's made of, but it's alien. You knew it wasn't going to be made of the same proteins as you. What is that? Why should that matter? It's just completely ridiculous to think that the only sort of morally important things are made of proteins and things like that. That can't be right. And you say, okay, well, what about the origin story? Was this thing evolved, or was it just made by somebody else? Well, so what if it was made by somebody else? Why does the random meandering process of evolution have some sort of monopoly on making morally important creatures? It doesn't. You can with engineering, you can duplicate everything that evolution was doing and more. So none of those things. So phrased this way, I think it completely matches our modern intuitions, which is that what you're made of, what you look like, meaning what you look like and where you come from, should not be a reliable guide to what kind of ethical relationship we're going to have, right? I mean, that seems pretty obvious at this point. And so the reason that I include all those things in my framework, and and of course, again, I'm not the first person to do this, but I'm working pretty hard on a framework that allows us to try to develop guidelines for relationships with creatures that don't share a history with us. They don't share composition with us. They're radically different, diverse intelligences, because none of those things are really good guides to what is a sentient being with whom you have to have a particular kind of relationship. And so it forces us to think about what are those important things, and those things come up all the time with unusual embodiments, and they even come up with kind of what we started out talking about, human augmentation. People say to me sometimes, well, if we change the human, so you're telling me we're going to have various implants and we're going to change our body structure and this and that, but won't we lose what it is to make us human? Isn't that right? So a lot of people are concerned about that, like are we not human anymore? And so that leads to an interesting question. What is important to you about being human? For example, recently, especially with this AI stuff, some people are working on what they call proof of humanity certificates. So when something shows up, a piece of work or something else, there's some kind of way of knowing that it actually comes from a human, or if you're talking to somebody that is a human as opposed to something else. So okay, so let's think about that. If what do you want if you're designing a proof of humanity certificate? What do you want the proof of humanity guarantee? Do you want, and so you're deciding, let's say you're gonna go to Mars and you're gonna live in a dome for a while, and who are you bringing with you, right? So that's what and so you want proof of, you don't want a Roomba, you want a human experience. What's the proof of humanity you want? Well, let's see. Is it the genome? Are you looking for somebody with a pristine modern human genome? I don't know about you. I don't care about genomes. That doesn't mean a thing to me. Are you talking about anatomy? So you want someone with less than N% of their body replaced with some sort of augmentation. So nobody with insulin pumps or well, maybe insulin pumps are okay, but brain implants are not. I don't care about that either. That doesn't mean anything to me. If I had a relationship, when my spouse said to me that she'd had a bunch of stuff, replaced with, with better parts. I mean, I don't care. It doesn't bother me. So what do we care about, right? What is it to be human, really? And different.
Companionship. I don't know. Care, empathy,
That's it.
feelings.
That's it. Care and empathy. I'm 100% there with you. So there's a paper that I and a few colleagues wrote, they're actually they're Buddhist scholars. And we wrote this paper on this idea that what actually defines any cognitive agent is so initially I wrote this other thing talking about the cognitive light cone, which is the spatiotemporal size of the biggest goal you're able to pursue. So if you're a bacterium, all your goals are little tiny ones, both in time and space. You only care about the local tiny thing that happens. And if you're a dog, you have a bigger cognitive light cone because you can have a little bit of memory going backwards and a little bit of predictive capacity going forwards. But you're never going to have a goal about something that's going to happen 3 weeks from now, 2 towns over. It's just never going to happen. And if you're a human, you could have a huge cognitive light cone where you're worried about what happens to the planet after you're dead, and then all these things. And so and if you're a superhuman bodhisattva of some sort, maybe unlike a human, you actually have the capacity to care about all the beings or some huge number of beings in the world, right? Humans can't actually do that, right? We have a limit to how it scales with how our care scales. But so this idea that what you really want, when somebody says I have a certificate of humanity, what I want is to know that, yeah, they have a minimal, at least a current modern human, and maybe more, it would be nice, but at least a minimal modern human level of compassion, that they are able to care in a particular, the size of that cognitive light cone with which they care about other beings is at least like mine. And then, then we can have a certain type of relationship. Otherwise, we have a different relationship as you might have with a cat or with a Roomba or with something else. But that proof of humanity to me is nothing to do with the body structure. It's nothing to do with the genetics, which you never see anyway. Are we able to care to the same extent about the same kinds of stuff? That's what I think we're talking about.
Okay, so let's because we haven't talked about it a little bit. Can we get into Xenobots? Do you mind talking to us about that?
Sure. Yeah. So the way that I would have talked about it, at the beginning of the work would be just to say that, well, these Xenobots are they're a biorobotics platform. They're a self-propelled little proto-organism made of frog skin. And they're what happens when you take frog skin and liberate it from its normal environment of being behavior shaped, aka bullied by the rest of the cells, to have this boring two-dimensional life on the surface of the tadpole, keeping out the bacteria. But when you take them away from all that, you get to see what they're really capable of, and what they do on their own when they're not being told what to do by other cells is to self-assemble in this amazing little round thing that runs around and has all kinds of interesting behaviors, including.
It kind of looks like Pac-Man, really.
It can, yeah, it can, and they have all kinds of amazing properties, including, for example, being able to do kinematic self-replication, which no other animal, as far as we know, does. What that is building copies of itself from loose material that it finds in the environment. So other skin cells, it'll corral them and make them into little copies of itself, and then they mature and they do the same thing. So it's able to do that. And so that's the Xenobot. And so what I would say is that. These are a potential biorobotics platform, because once we learn to program their form and function, they will do useful things, and also they are a kind of a sandbox in which we can practice cracking the code of morphogenesis. Because so one of the amazing things about the Xenobots is that they remind us how little we understand about. And this gets back to that same issue, or the security issue, which is how little we understand about where the goals of collectives come from. Because typically when you have some sort of plant or animal and you say, why does it look a certain way? Why does it act a certain way? The answer is, well, eons of selection. So long periods of shaping by natural selection has led them to be this or that. But there's never been any Xenobots. There's never been any selection to be a good Xenobot. Where do their behaviors and their shape come from? And so this idea that there are, that biology gives us these problem-solving machines that can do other things besides what we normally see them doing, says that Xenobots are not only a platform for practical biological machines, and not only a way to try to understand morphogenesis for biomedical purposes, but they are also a kind of they're a kind of instrument, they're a kind of periscope into this space, this morphogenetic space of possibilities that we normally have a little tiny slit through which we look. That's the standard embryo. So frog eggs make frogs, acorns make oak trees, and so that's it. And so that's what we tend to think. And so that's a tiny little slit of that morphospace that we can see. But once we start exploring, we can find out that that morphospace has all kinds of other possibilities in it. And so what is the Xenobot? So the Xenobot is really, it's the cells, the frog cells, but it is also Doug Blackiston, Sam Kriegman, Josh Bongard, and myself, which are the team that created them. It is also the AI that was used to shape these bots. All of those things together are what is actually the Xenobot. It's this weird it's this weird diverse multi-component, multi-scale system that all together is a tool for exploring this morphospace, for understanding, diverse intelligences and all of that.
Which is both incredible, right? Because I don't know why, but this is reminding me like Avatar, where you can like connect, you plug in and you can connect, and it's both kind of biological and digital or whatnot. But does that mean it's the threat landscape as well is kind of unknown? And I'll try to unpack that a little bit. Even with the next question is, what does cyber biosecurity mean to you? And I'd love to hear more about the guidelines that you mentioned that you're currently developing. But that word, and I know it's clunky, cyber biosecurity, and I hate using it, but the job that it does is trying to put attention to these like emerging threats that are going to arise from the integration of various spaces like cyberspace and biology. But here we're talking about not only two kind of the digital and the bio, as you said, it's multi-scale, multi-dimensions. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this.
Yeah. Okay, so prefacing all of this by saying that I'm no expert in security of any kind. Okay, so these are kind of my own harebrained thoughts about what I understand about these things. As far as I can tell, long before there was any of this kind of technology, it was already very clear that we are under significant biological threat. So just from the fact of airplane travel alone, and the degradation of the environment, and the spread of humans into other regions, and climate change and all of this stuff, it was already clear that there are going to be plagues developing naturally. That much is obvious. So right now, so we start there. We start with the fact that there are many types of things in the biosphere that can be disastrous naturally. So, and that our activities so far are on the Earth are bringing us closer to these kinds of things that we really don't understand very well at all. So that's a given to me. So that's before we start on any kind of biotechnology. Then in the let's say 70s, 80s, and 90s, it became really clear that making gain-of-function biology is pretty easy. So recombinant DNA, in terms of, look, you could take this virus that's, kind of very good at spreading around, but it doesn't really hurt anything, and this other nasty thing like an oncogene, which is really devastating, but it doesn't really, really get around. any beginning grad student in one of many molecular biology labs could make something like this, right? So then it becomes obvious that, okay, novel things. So we have natural things that are potentially a real problem. We have really easy, low cost ways to create, and of course, people are working on this stuff. They're studying these things. So that's a possibility. So all of that is with us. So I don't believe that everything was sort of hunky-dory, we were fine, and then this like weird, scary synthetic biology and AI is coming along, and now we're screwed. I don't believe that at all. I think this research is actually the only thing we have that can that has any hope. And I don't know how things are going to turn out, but it's the only thing we have that has any hope of actually letting us survive the first two things that I started talking about. So I see this, and of course there are a million ways to make this work, make things worse too, but I think we were already in a place where we have major species level threats that are existential threats that are already there, and this AI and this new bioengineering is basically our best hope of thriving despite all of that.
Yeah, right. So to put it differently, how can these principles, so the bioelectricity, the cellular control, cracking the morphogenesis code, how can they be harnessed then to enhance, let's say, security measures in biological systems? And please feel free to speak to the guidelines that you said that you're working on as well.
Yeah, I mean, so to be clear, the guidelines, I mean, there are guidelines. So all of us scientists work within established guidelines for the safety ethics for all of that stuff. So those already exist. There are massive numbers of regulations that guide everything we do. I mean, I can't touch a frog without a protocol that was reviewed by things you could do when you go fishing. For us, we need a protocol approved by an ethics committee of biosafety folks and animal ethicists and all that. So the guidelines exist. The guideline that I was talking about was developing was not around safety per se. It was around how we relate to other unconventional intelligences of all embodied. So I don't know that it does that much for the safety aspects, for the security aspects.
No, but I like it because you're redefining. No, I think I'm gonna align with you and actually put the traditional and conventional way of thinking about safety and security to the side, and move along this conversation with how you decide. You're talking about guidelines, which actually will become more important because it's inevitable for us to intersect and progress in this space. So let's go with yours. Let's right. So how do we deal with these new beings, these new embodied minds?
The central issue here is being able to recognize novel collective intelligences and have some predictive value over what they're going to want to do when they form, and have some ability to communicate with them and have some control over what happens next. We create collective intelligences all the time. So we're talking about social structures, political structures, Internet of Things. You might get a letter from the town that you live in. Who's this town that's sending you a letter? It's not the poor clerk that had to type the thing. It's the town that's sending you messages, right? And so we make these things all the time. But what we really don't have a very good science of is being able to predict what's going to happen. So here I know the pieces, I know the cell, or I know a certain engineered part, or I know even a robot, and I put these things together into a robotic swarm or a body or a large organization of some sort. What kind of mind, maybe very primitive, maybe more advanced, what kind of mind is it going to have, and what are the goals going to be? We do not know anymore. It's the exact same problem as figuring out whether frogolotls are going to have legs. And this is, this goes all the way back. Alan Turing, who was very interested in unconventional intelligences, right, and different embodiments of mind and so on, wrote a paper on chemical morphogenesis. And you might wonder why. Why would somebody who's a computer scientist, a mathematician, interested in intelligence and computation, why would he be writing about chemical morphogenesis? And for really exactly the same reason. I think he saw clearly that all of these systems are potentially autopoietic systems that can pull themselves together and have novel mental properties, including goal-directed behavior and so on, that that are not obvious or apparent from understanding the parts. So his initial, those Turing patterns that he studied, have very simple two chemicals, no overriding boss on top telling them what to do, and yet they make these interesting complex patterns that we now know can solve problems and are working all over the body and so on. We need a science, and so this is what I think I'm working on, among other things, and many other people are too. We need a science of understanding that collective intelligence that you build or that already exists around you and you don't know how to interface it with. What does it want to do? What are the goals? In what space? In what problem space? With what competency does it pursue those goals? Right? What are they? Can we learn to detect them? Can we learn to rewrite them to a more socially adaptive version? That's what we need. That ultimately is the biggest. I think if I had to name one kind of overriding thing. That's the biggest existential risk for us as a planet is the poor ability of us to recognize, predict, and modulate the action of collective intelligences that we are not smart enough to recognize right off the bat.
And to try and understand that, that's where you use the Xenobots. The Xenobots are limited to a specific. Is it only the frog skin cells that do that, or do you also? Okay, you see it in other. So like, do different cells behave differently than we expect them, according to cell type, or is it? Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I do. So, okay, there's a really significant piece of work that's going to come out. It isn't out yet. It isn't peer reviewed again, so I'm not going to talk about it yet. So, although you and I can have this conversation like at the end of the summer. Xenobots definitely don't have anything to do with frogs per se. But I will talk about an example that's not mine that is kind of already out there, which is I don't know if you've ever seen what plant galls are. Ever seen these things? So you can catch a picture of this in one of my recent papers or my talks. But basically, you look at an acorn and it has an oak genome, and we think we know what that genome makes. It makes these flat green things that are leaves that are very particular. They have a structure, they have a color, they have a particular shape. We know what it makes. But sometimes when you see one of these things, one of these leaves, they have this big ball sitting on top of it that's this big spiky red thing. It's absolutely striking when you see it. And so you look at it and you say, what the heck is that? And then you find out that what that is a wasp parasite that laid an embryo onto the leaf, and that embryo has prompted the rest of the leaf cells with certain chemicals to build this crazy giant thing around it that looks nothing like. I mean, they're absolutely.
That is insane.
These things are just amazing, and so and biology is all over the place with this. Okay, people don't normally talk about this, but it's everywhere. So this idea that we would have never known that the collective of plant cells is able to build this thing if we didn't have this example where the signals from the embryo have pushed the system into a different part of morphospace. Instead of flat and green, you've got this round, spiky yellow and orange thing. And we would have never known that that's even possible. And so what's really critical about things like Xenobots is to understand this kind of biological hacking. So systems getting other systems to move in different non-obvious regions of that morphospace. And the idea that all of that is not just, that wasp doesn't 3D print this thing by taking little plant cells and putting them how it goes. It sends, and this is not a well understood process, but it sends commands to the leaf cells and gets them to build it, just like that happens in biology all over the place. And so taking advantage of the intelligence and competency of your substrate, of which, and so I have this phrase that what we as engineers work with and what evolution works with is an agential material. These are not passive materials. These are not even merely some kind of active matter. These are agential materials. These are materials with an agenda. And if you know how to communicate to that collective, you can get them to do amazing things or terrible things. And we are not good at knowing what's going to happen and at manipulating them. And we have to get good at it. It's a planetary scale requirement.
I'm still stuck at this relationship with the wasp and the leaf, and I'm just thinking, basically we can redefine, once we crack this, we can redefine the way we think about ecosystems and what, the relationship between different organisms within an ecosystem. It's just
and people said this right, and to be clear, people have said this for well over 100 years. This idea that ecosystems have stress and that they're a kind of organism, and this whole Gaia hypothesis and all this stuff. So people have said that stuff for a long time. I think.
Sorry to interrupt, but can you feel, so how we're more, the classic, we're more bacteria than we are ourselves, and that holds true as well in like your gut microbiome, which there's a lot.
It depends. We're also more water than we are anything else. I mean that counting, counting these
maybe
things.
Maybe that's not the best expression then.
Well, people use it all the time, though. I mean, it's true. Yeah.
It would be awesome, people have like gut issues and we like don't understand, even though we've spent like decades in this space in terms of the microbiome, we really haven't scratched the surface and cracking and understanding how to manipulate it to a healthier state, but also, as we spoke about earlier, perhaps to an augmented state as well. But it would be great to kind of tap into the biology that's in around us, all the time and try and optimize it.
I mean, it's absolutely essential because that biology is optimizing us. So there's a parasite that you can get that I forget that, I'm blanking on the name now, but it's a well-known thing. What it normally does is it has part of its life cycle that needs to be inside a cat, and so if it finds itself inside a rodent, what it does is it lowers the risk aversion of that animal, so he goes walking around in front of cats and gets eaten and that kind of thing. They find that parasite in humans that were in two cases, two types of sample cases. One is people who crashed motorcycles driving too fast for conditions, and also in captains of industry who have to take risks and do these crazy things. They tend to be disproportionately infected with this thing because what it does is it lowers risk aversion. So what it's learned to do evolutionarily, what it's learned to do is to hack the system that it's in to get that system to do various things. So you can bet our various microbiota are hacking us. All of our cells are hacking each other. Otherwise, there wouldn't be a multicellular body to form in the first place. This is all over the place. And if we don't get with the program and understand that this is what's going on, that biology and science in general, I think, has had a lot of telephobia. They're really uncomfortable with goal type of talk. But it's time to get over that. Since the 40s, the cybernetics has given us an understanding of systems with goals, and it doesn't have to be magic, and it doesn't have to be biological. But of course, biological systems are really good at scaling goals and doing interesting, having goals in different spaces. This is the science that needs to be developed. This is the field. It's a very interdisciplinary field.
Would you call it kind of the opposite of Darwinism, essentially, because we're doing the flip of it or the inverse of it, rather than the environment kind of, rather than us depending on the environment to evolve into whatever X state is, if we can tap into the morphogenesis code, we can do the opposite.
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know that I would say it's opposite. And really the person you want to talk about this, I have a colleague, Richard Watson, in Southampton in the UK, and he is developing some of the most significant work out there on a new understanding of evolution, looked at as learning. So you really want him for that aspect of it. But what I would say is, I don't know if it's the opposite, but but there are a couple of differences. There are a couple of fundamental, and I just wrote a massive paper about all this stuff exactly. Is what does the implications of the intelligence of our cells have? What implications does that have for evolution? For the evolutionary process? And there are many implications, but like one of the biggest, I think, changes that we have to make in our thinking is that evolution does not just make solutions to specific problems, meaning I'm going to evolve something that's adaptive for a specific environment, a set of problems. It makes problem-solving machines. It's not evolving, and it's not searching the space of all the possible phenotypes that it can have. It's really searching the space of behavior shaping signals. It's searching the space of possible ways that cells can get each other and parasites and conspecifics and so on can get each other to do various things. That intelligence is baked into the substrate, and you can bet that evolution's making use of it. And so I'm not going to say it's the opposite of Darwinism, but it has recognizing that you have intelligence all through the body, not just the final, individual. So evolution, there are populations, and then there are individuals, and then they're made of parts, and the typical thing is intelligence exists at one level. It's not up here. It's in the organism. Like that's it. That has to go. That's a non-starter at this point. And so once you've let go of that, evolution starts to look quite different. But some things still stay the same, but some things have to change.
Okay, Michael, I know you tried to avoid this earlier in terms of time frames, but I'm going to insist on this. It's a question I ask all my guests. It's 2073, so 50 years from now. Describe our society in 10 words, and I'll help you count. I have an easy job, but here to help.
Oh my God! Look, I mean, we can have fun and try it, but I think fundamentally our ability to predict anything 50 years into the future is minuscule. We're going to be wrong about almost everything. But okay, let's see. I think it's going to be incredibly diverse, and I don't mean diverse in the standard way that we talk about human populations. I think it's going to be like the cantina scene in Star Wars, where you've got this mix of weird looking biologicals, robots of every possible design. Like that's what I mean, right? So I think it's going to be diverse. I think the language is going to be completely different. So I think I don't know of a single word for this, but I think all of the categories that we use now about machines and versus living organisms, all those that terminology is going to be gone. I think that it's going to be mindful, meaning I mean, and Eric Hole had a nice piece on this about becoming animists again, because everything around us is going to have a kind of mind. So between AI and a lot of these biologicals, everything around you is going to have some kind of baked in intelligence for you to potentially interact with everything, all the objects, everything. So it's going to be just full of minds everywhere. I think there will be freedoms that we can't even begin to imagine now. Freedom of embodiment, of how you relate to the biological world in terms of what you eat and things like that. That we can't even comprehend that's the real freedom is not just what you say, but what your brain structure allows you to think. Yeah,
so diverse, kind of other language or language going to change some way, mindful or minds everywhere, and then kind of different freedoms or embodiments of freedom. Yeah. That's 4.
Yeah.
6 to go.
Oh, wow. I think that I think the biosphere is going to look completely different. So I hope we are living off planet by then in significant ways. So I think I don't know what word relates to that, but I think also what's gonna radically change is our understanding of what we're supposed to do with our lives in terms of this business of working because you have to make a living, like that's going to be gone. I think with advances in energy and in AI, I don't think anybody's going to need to do anything they don't want to do. And so the next question is going to be, well, what do you want to do? With potentially a very long life, you don't need to do anything. What do you want to do? And so that I don't know what word corresponds to that, but I think a total redefinition of work and life purpose is going to be there. I think that this issue of a lot of people are, for example, worried about what are they going to do when AIs can do things better than them. I think there will be a widespread realization, which is also already true now with the 7 or however many billion people we have, is that there's always somebody that does things better than whatever you do. There's always somebody better. You don't need to worry about that. Enjoy what you're doing. Try to produce something, and it's okay if there are others that are somewhere in the world. There are others that are better than you at it. That's I think we will have internalized that. And I think ethics, there will be a new, I hope by then, there will be a completely new and different kind of ethics that are not based on the kind of ancient and really not appropriate criteria that have been with us up until now. So we will know how to relate ethically to creatures that don't share appearance or provenance with us. I don't know, how many is that?
Right, yeah, so we have diverse, we have new language, we have minds everywhere, or mindful, new embodiments of freedoms. We're off planet. We will have a different kind of purpose of life. That's how I summarize the what do you want to do, or what now. And longer life, I added that in, or yep, longer life. And joy in, or internalizing the understanding of others being more intelligent than perhaps ourselves. And then there's a new form of ethics. I think we need one more, and that will be 10 concepts. It's more words.
Right. I'll say potentiality, which is basically, I think what we're going to break free from is this idea that anything that we see now is the way it should be in some sense. This idea that this is optimal and this is how it's got to be. I think that's going to be gone, and I think that's going to really radically free our minds to imagine new possibilities. So literally, it will be obvious to every child as they're growing up that they can, and anything that's not forbidden by the laws of physics is probably on the table for them to do. And so that idea that you don't have to stick with the way things are when you enter this world. You can change it in ways that are unimaginable to us now, and we are still very much held over from this. I don't know, I suppose it's a religious, old religious view that you were put into by some being that was watching out for your welfare, and that you're in some optimal scenario that you better not rock the boat. And I think we're going to realize, now another word you could add to that is responsibility. I think we're going to realize that we are responsible. We can't blame status quo on anybody. It's up to us. And here we are, sort of halfway to making what a mature society and a mature world might look like. And it's on us to get the rest of the way. So I think that'll be there too.
I really like the end of this podcast. I think responsibility is a key word. Michael, thank you so much. My mind is still blown, and I'm gonna have to pick up the pieces after this call. And I'm definitely gonna get back in touch when you can speak about your newest publication. I should say that all of your publications and any links that you want shared in this podcast, they will. Thank you so much for taking the time.
So much. I appreciate it. It was a fun conversation. Yeah, thank you.
Perfect. Thank you.